She vanished 6 months ago, leaving him broken, his trust shattered. And now, in the dead of night, Cale receives a call that changes everything. A child, a secret, and a danger he never saw coming. What she did, why she left, and who's truly behind the shadows. You'll have to watch to uncover every shocking twist. Don't blink. The truth waits, and nothing is as it seems. Welcome back to Heartwoven Tales. I'm Selena. Hope you're doing well. I want to ask, where are you listening to me from today? Drop it in the comments because I'd love to know. And tell me, are you with me right now, ready to dive into a story that will grip your heart and keep you on the edge of your seat? Or not? I really want to know. All right. Now, let's dive into this blockbuster tale, filled with secrets, love, betrayal, and twists that you will never see coming. Get ready, because this story will pull you in and won't let go. At 2:17 a.m., when Busan's harbor lights were half erased by fog and the sea pressed its breath against the glass walls of the penthouse, Cale Moreno stood alone in the dark, awake not because of insomnia, but because sleep had long stopped visiting men like him. The city below pulsed with muted danger, ships idling like patient predators, cranes frozen mid-reach, alarms distant and indistinct, all of it softened by mist, yet sharpened by memory. Silence filled the room in layers, expensive silence, curated silence, but it never reached his chest, where something always stayed tense, waiting. 6 months had passed since the divorce papers were signed, stamped, buried, and filed away like a closed operation, and Cale had trained himself to believe that silence meant completion, that absence meant resolution, that a name erased from his life stayed erased. The fog outside made everything look unfinished, as if the night itself wasn't convinced. The phone vibrated once on the black marble counter, not loud, not urgent, just deliberate, as though whoever was calling understood timing better than manners. Cale didn't look at it immediately. In his world, calls at this hour were either mistakes or messages that changed balance sheets, bloodlines, or burial counts, and he had learned never to rush toward either. When the screen lit up again, private line, encrypted channel, hospital clearance code embedded beneath the number, his body reacted before his mind did, shoulders tightening, breath slowing, instinct sliding into place like a loaded weapon. He answered without greeting, without name, because people who called him this way already knew who he was, and people who didn't were already dead. The voice on the line was calm in a way that didn't try to be kind, measured in a way that suggested training rather than empathy, and it spoke as if reading from a file that had been opened, verified, and accepted as fact. It said a woman named Iris Moreno had given birth less than an hour ago. It said the child was male. It said she had named him as the father. For a brief second, Cale wondered if someone was testing him, if this was a calculated provocation designed to draw him out of position, because Underworld kings did not receive sentimental surprises, and ghosts did not call back from the dead. He let out a laugh before the thought fully formed, short and hollow, the kind of sound that carried no humor and no warmth, because Iris Moreno was not a woman who existed anymore, not in his present, not in his future, not in the carefully controlled narrative he told himself every night when the city went quiet. Iris had vanished after the divorce without explanations that satisfied him, without goodbyes that softened the damage, leaving behind evidence that had been too clean, too perfectly arranged to question at the time, proof that suggested betrayal without leaving room for doubt. He had accepted it the way he accepted executions and negotiations, with cold efficiency, filing her away as a mistake corrected by distance. The name on the call dragged all of that back with brutal simplicity, and Cale's first instinct was denial wrapped in irritation, because the past did not get to return just because it wanted to. He said nothing, letting the silence stretch, waiting for the voice to correct itself, to apologize, to admit error. Instead, the voice continued, unshaken, stating that Iris Moreno had collapsed moments after delivery, that she had refused further treatment, that she had demanded his presence before allowing any intervention, and that her vitals were unstable enough for the hospital to comply. The words did not rush, did not soften, did not dramatize, which made them more dangerous than shouting ever could. Cale's gaze drifted to the window without conscious decision, to the ocean below that now seemed closer than it had seconds ago, darker, heavier, its surface reflecting nothing back. Something shifted in the room, subtle but undeniable, as if the night had leaned in to listen. He felt the familiar instinct to regain control, to dismiss the call, to order verification, to bury the disruption before it spread. But another sensation crept beneath that training, something unwelcome and sharp, something that did not belong in a man who had survived by eliminating weakness. 6 months was not enough time to erase a voice from memory, a way of standing, a silence that once felt safe instead of empty. Cale had buried the past carefully, professionally, sealing it behind power and distance, convincing himself that survival required detachment, but the call peeled that work apart with a single sentence. The past, it seemed, had not stayed buried. It had waited. It had grown lungs. He asked one question, his tone flat, his words chosen with surgical restraint, demanding confirmation, demanding data, demanding something tangible he could either destroy or control. The response came immediately, not defensive, not persuasive, but factual, and the line went quiet just long enough to transmit an attached file. Cale didn't open it right away. His fingers hovered above the screen as if touching it might confirm something he wasn't ready to face. Around him, the penthouse remained immaculate, untouched by human presence despite being filled with evidence of human power, and for the first time in months, the space felt hostile rather than secure. The fog outside thickened, swallowing another line of harbor lights, and Cale realized his breathing had changed without his permission. He told himself this was strategy, that refusing to react was strength, that waiting was dominance, but the truth pressed closer with every passing second, heavy and insistent. He opened the file. Not an image, not a document, not a name. A waveform filled the screen instead, steady, rhythmic, unmistakable even to a man who had trained himself to recognize only threats. A recorded heartbeat played through the phone's speaker, soft but persistent, not rushed, not weak, alive in a way that could not be argued away. Cale reached for his coat without thinking, muscle memory overriding logic, his body already moving towards something his mind hadn't accepted yet. Halfway through the motion, he stopped, eyes locked on the pulsing line on the screen, the sound filling the room, filling spaces he had kept sealed for years. The heartbeat continued, patient, undeniable, carrying a weight no empire could absorb. For the first time since the divorce, since the silence, since Iris disappeared from his world, Cale Moreno understood that this was not a call he could end, not a past he could outgrow, not a truth he could execute into obedience. The night held its breath with him, waiting to see whether he would answer what was already alive. The roar of the city was distant now, filtered through reinforced glass and layers of security that gave the hospital an almost unreal quiet. But Cale Moreno felt nothing but the hollow echo of the heartbeat recording still pulsing in his mind. Every step he took down the pristine corridor of the private medical wing seemed measured, deliberate, like a man crossing a battlefield in slow motion, where the enemy was unseen but breathing at the edges of the fog. The antiseptic smell mixed with the faint tang of salt from the nearby harbor, and Cale noticed it the way one notices a threat, unconsciously, as a warning. The walls gleamed under cold fluorescent lights, polished and professional, yet none of it promised comfort. None of it softened the tension that had settled in his chest with the weight of a truth he was only beginning to grasp. When the doors to the private room slid open, he felt a contraction of memory that caught him by surprise, sharp and intrusive, like a blade sliding through fog. There she was, Iris Moreno, pale, fragile, her hair damp from fever or tears, skin stretched and delicate, holding a newborn against her chest with a grip that was protective, possessive, and absolute. The baby stirred slightly, small fingers curling instinctively, and Cale felt an unfamiliar tug in the center of his control, as though the world had tilted just enough to remind him that some forces operated outside strategy or power. He didn't step closer. He didn't reach for the child. Fear, not doubt, rooted him to the threshold because every instinct he had told him that touching them without permission would shatter something delicate and irreplaceable. That intrusion could undo what was already balanced on a knife's edge. 6 months ago, Cale had believed she had betrayed him. He had allowed himself to believe the proof was sufficient, the evidence too neat to question, that her disappearance was deliberate, her absence calculated, and her silence a lie folded into layers of strategy he had failed to anticipate. The betrayal had been accepted with professional detachment, filed into a corner of memory he kept locked and monitored like an internal archive, catalogued but ignored. And now, standing at the edge of her hospital bed, he felt every denial crumble as the reality of her presence hit him harder than he could have predicted. She was alive. She was breathing. And she had named him as the father, a truth that refused to wait for justification or reconciliation. A nurse, quiet as a shadow, stepped closer, lowering her voice so that only Cale could hear. She whispered that Iris had been asking for him since she had arrived, that in her moments of vulnerability, when pain had made her body tremble and the monitors had beeped warning tones, her first question had been whether he was safe. The words hit Cale in an unexpected rhythm, each one pressing against his chest, each one a reminder that love had existed in the spaces he had refused to notice. He had been so consumed with control, with strategy, with survival, that he had forgotten how to witness life outside his empire. And now the truth confronted him in the form of a woman whose gaze could pierce the armor he had spent years perfecting. Her eyes opened slowly, blinking through exhaustion, and the instant they found his face, it was as though no time had passed. The months of absence evaporated, the barriers of betrayal dissolved, and Cale felt a surge of something he had long mistaken for weakness: longing. Love hit him harder than guilt, hotter than anger, sharper than any blade he had ever wielded or faced in his career. In that gaze, Iris was simultaneously fragile and formidable, wounded and unwavering, and he understood in a flash that this woman had survived not because she was careless, but because she had chosen to endure, because she had waited for him even when he had failed to arrive in her life. "You never looked where it mattered," she breathed, voice low and ragged, almost a whisper carried on the edge of the sterile air. The words were not an accusation. They were a revelation. A key that unlocked a part of him he had thought irretrievably lost. Guardian. That single word slid into his blood like poison, sharp and corrosive, infecting the control he prided himself on, awakening instincts that had lain dormant under layers of steel and calculation. It was not just the word, it was the weight behind it, the knowledge that his absence had meant something, that his presence had always mattered even when he failed to see it. Cale's hand hovered, tense and uncertain, over the small console beside the bed where monitors displayed Iris's vitals and the newborn's fragile heartbeat. He resisted the urge to reach, to touch, to claim, because the last time he had tried to assert control over what mattered, it had only driven her further away. Control had been his fortress. Absence had been his punishment. And now, confronting the living proof of both his mistakes and his potential for redemption, he felt the fragile architecture of his certainty begin to crumble. Every instinct screamed to protect, every memory screamed of loss, and every breath he took felt like trespassing into a territory he had abandoned 6 months ago. Iris's hand shifted slightly, brushing the newborn's soft hair, and Cale realized for the first time that she had survived the dangers he could no longer ignore. The hospital wing had been threatened, the delivery had been complicated, and yet she had endured without complaint, demanding only that he arrive. He understood now that survival had not been passive, it had been active, a conscious choice made under pressure he could never fully measure, and he hated himself for having believed she had been reckless when she had been courageous. And as he watched, the baby's eyelids flickered, tiny breaths rising and falling like a fragile tide, and Cale felt an unfamiliar responsibility pressing down, heavier than any empire, more precise than any weapon he had ever held. The nurse whispered again, quieter this time, a caution wrapped in concern. Someone might have deliberately endangered her, that the signs of negligence and interference were subtle, and that the moment of collapse had been too coincidental to ignore. Cale's eyes narrowed, instincts snapping back into place even as his heart remained entangled in the room's quiet intensity. Whoever had threatened her, whoever had used the past as a weapon, had underestimated his persistence, his reach, and the fact that his care for Iris had never died. The room, pristine and artificial in its cleanliness, now felt like a stage set for revelation, each shadow a potential threat, each beep of the monitors a reminder of what was at stake. Cale stepped forward, slow, measured, every movement deliberate, yet he did not cross the bed's edge. The child stirred again, and he could see the subtle arch of the newborn's back, the tiny fingers curling instinctively around Iris's thin gown, claiming safety and warmth. And Cale, for the first time in months, realized that he had not lost her to betrayal, had not lost himself to cold calculation. He had only failed to see the battlefield she had fought silently, alone, demanding only that he return when the time was right. The tension in his shoulders did not ease, because understanding did not erase danger, it sharpened it. The memory of the divorce, the cold signing of papers, the disappearance of a life he had assumed was gone, swelled in his chest like a warning. The hollow apartment, the empty nights, the endless city below all had been preparation for this moment, yet none of it mattered until he understood the magnitude of her survival. She had endured threats he could only imagine, navigated the absence of his protection, and had still emerged alive, still determined, still tethered to a part of him that refused to die. And as he studied her, the faint rise and fall of her chest under hospital sheets, he felt the slow, inexorable weight of realization pressing down. Someone with power, influence, and intent had come dangerously close to extinguishing what mattered most to him. The nurse, her voice barely audible, left the room, closing the door softly, leaving Cale and Iris alone, and in that silence, Cale recognized the full scope of the stakes. He saw the faint bruising along her wrists, subtle and precise, evidence of struggle controlled and restrained, and the tension in the newborn's tiny form mirrored the fragility of everything he had ever tried to protect. His mind raced through possibilities, scanning the familiar patterns of threats and betrayals he had learned to anticipate, and yet he realized this was different. This was personal, intimate, a violation not of territory or profit but of trust, and he hated the person who had done it with every carefully measured fiber of himself. Iris stirred, eyes half-lidded, and Cale saw in them a question unspoken yet urgent. Had he returned too late? He could not answer, could not apologize, could only watch, heart constricted and thoughts fractured, as the woman who had once been the center of his life now lay before him, tethered to a child who represented both innocence and peril. Every instinct screamed to shield, to act, to assert dominance, yet another voice reminded him that hasty action could destroy what remained. The room seemed to hold its breath with him, time suspended between past betrayal and present responsibility, between the love that never faded and the danger that lurked unseen. He knelt, finally, careful not to touch, careful not to impose, letting his presence become a quiet statement. He was here, watching, witnessing, guarding in the only way he could, silent and steadfast. And as Iris's gaze fixed on him again, recognition flashing with every subtle flicker of her expression, he felt a pulse of emotion he had not allowed himself in half a year, love tempered by regret, fear tempered by hope, and above all, an unspoken vow that nothing would endanger them again without consequences. Then, in a fragment of awareness, he saw at the smallest detail on the monitor, the faintest irregularity he could not ignore, a pattern that suggested interference, a hand guiding the pass toward danger, and the first thread of understanding slid into place. The woman who had raised him, the one who had taught him control and loyalty, might have been the reason Iris had almost died. The revelation hit him like ice, and the calm surface of the room broke with tension, thick and suffocating, because every instinct whispered that the war he thought ended had quietly shifted closer to the people he loved. The city outside remained unaware, fog pressing against the harbor lights, while inside, K.L. Moreno realized that survival, trust, and love were about to collide in ways he could neither calculate nor escape. Sen. The drive to the hilltop residence was silent, save for the muted hum of the engine, as though the car itself knew it carried more than a man. It carried memories, reckoning, and questions that demanded answers. The night outside clung to the edges of the windshield, darkness so dense it seemed capable of swallowing the city whole, fog rolling in waves that blurred the lights below into smears of gold and white. K.L. Moreno did not speak, his hands gripping the steering wheel with the precision of a man who had never allowed uncertainty to touch him. Yet inside, something long dormant stirred a mixture of dread, anticipation, and the reluctant thrill of confronting the woman who had shaped his life with invisible hands. The hilltop mansion appeared suddenly, lights piercing the darkness like watchful eyes. Its gates, wrought in iron and polished to a meticulous sheen, opened at a gesture from Cale's security code, as though the house had been waiting for him. He parked at the topmost terrace. The city sprawled below like a kingdom he once commanded, yet none of it mattered tonight. Every step toward the residence carried weight, each one measured, careful, because the moment inside would not allow recklessness. He walked through halls lined with portraits of predecessors and ancestors, eyes following him like silent witnesses to a legacy built on control, manipulation, and precision. Maribel was already there, sitting in the high-backed chair in the study, her posture calm and composed, hands folded neatly in her lap, expression unreadable. She did not rise, did not glance at him with surprise, nor did she mask the faint, knowing smile that crept at the corners of her mouth. She had expected this confrontation. She had anticipated the exact moment he would come, the questions he would ask, the accusations he would level, and she waited because she knew, as always, that patience was her greatest weapon. "Cale," she said softly, her voice smooth, measured, the kind of sound that reminded him how words could wound more sharply than knives. She spoke of loyalty, as if reading scripture, each phrase deliberate, each intonation designed to enforce submission and understanding. "You have always misunderstood," she said, almost conversational, almost gentle, yet there was nothing casual in her tone. Every syllable carried weight, every pause a subtle demonstration of her control. Cale noticed the stillness of her surroundings, the absence of tension in her frame, the way she had mastered calm while orchestrating chaos for decades. He did not answer immediately. He stood in the threshold, observing, analyzing, letting her speak, because for the first time he realized that listening might reveal truths that action could not. His instincts screamed that she was dangerous, that this meeting could spiral into anything. Yet another part of him, buried beneath years of indoctrination and discipline, wanted to understand. He wanted to see why she had always manipulated the threads of his world, why love and loyalty had been measured and distributed as though currency, why Iris had been endangered and protected all at once. Maribel's eyes flickered, just slightly, toward the city visible through the tall windows behind her, a subtle acknowledgement that she was aware of the Empire's reach, of Cale's power, yet she remained unmoved. "You think you have survived because you are strong," she said, "but strength has never been enough. Control is what sustains. Every person who entered your life, every move you made, every image, every rumor, every file passed through my hands first." Her tone was neither proud nor apologetic. It was a statement of fact, a revelation of invisible power. Cale felt the cold weight of realization settle in his chest. He wanted to shout, to accuse, to demand explanations, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he allowed the silence to stretch, heavy and deliberate, each second forcing him to confront what he had refused to see. the truth that his entire understanding of loyalty and love had been filtered through a lens he had not chosen. "Why, Iris?" he finally asked, voice low, controlled, but tight with the tension of restrained fury. The words were simple, but their implications reached deeper than he could articulate. Maribel's smile widened, subtle, almost maternal in its execution, yet it carried the weight of judgment and ownership. "Iris was always your weakness," she said softly, as if revealing a scientific fact. "And weakness is something I cannot permit in this world. You would have destroyed what mattered most without realizing it. She survived because I allowed it, because I controlled the outcome, because love was never something you were permitted to wield freely." Cale's fists clenched at his sides, not in threat, but in frustration, because the truth stung worse than any physical blow. Her words, measured and precise, forced him to see a reality he had long denied, that everything he believed about control, about loyalty, about the very notion of love, had been filtered through a mind more calculating than his own. She had built a network of influence, manipulated outcomes, and orchestrated his world in ways invisible yet absolute. And Iris, the woman he had loved and believed lost, had existed in the midst of her schemes, surviving, enduring, waiting not because of his protection, but because of Maribel's intervention, precise and unyielding. Cale's mind raced through the possibilities, scanning through files, memories, interactions, trying to connect threads that had been invisible to him, trying to locate the moment when control had been wrested from him and wielded by another. Every revelation brought both clarity and unease. He realized that Maribel's intervention had not only preserved life, but had shaped perception, manipulated allegiance, and ensured loyalty, his loyalty to her design. Love, he understood now, had always been conditional, parceled out strategically, never spontaneous, never free. When he finally raised his voice, it was calm, deliberate, not as an accusation, but as an articulation of awakening. "You've always decided what I could feel, who I could trust, who I could love," he said, each word measured, echoing slightly in the study's high ceiling. "And now you want me to accept that your control saved the one person I never stopped loving." Maribel did not flinch. She did not respond immediately. Instead, she let the statement settle, let him sit with the discomfort of realization that he had been a pawn in her design, that love, power, and survival had been distributed by a woman who had never hesitated to manipulate even the people closest to him. Finally, she leaned back slightly, hands still folded, a teacher correcting a child with patience that was infuriating in its precision. "I kept you powerful," she said softly, almost a whisper, but in it was the weight of decades of strategy, the subtle pride of one who believed in outcomes rather than morality. Every loss, every lesson, every consequence, it was to prepare you for this world, to ensure survival. You see weakness as betrayal, Cale. But what you fail to understand is that love is never allowed in my world unless it is controlled. Her words hit him like a wave, breaking over the carefully constructed walls he had built around himself. Rage and clarity intertwined, burning together as he realized how much he had misunderstood, how much he had been shaped, how much he had never been free. The room seemed to contract around him, shadows folding over the corners, silence punctuating every heartbeat, every breath. He understood now that the threats to Iris, the fragile life in her arms, the uncertainty and fear were not random. They were consequences of power wielded with precision, consequences he had never fully grasped until now. Cale's mind raced. Files, images, threats, rumors, everything passed through her hands, orchestrated, manipulated, controlled. Every obstacle he had faced, every manipulation he had believed came from outside forces, was, in some way, a product of her influence. The realization coiled in his chest, tightening, constricting, making each breath deliberate, urgent. And yet, in the depths of that constriction, a spark of strategy surfaced, clear and sharp. If she had this much control, if she had shaped his life to such an extent, then the threats to Iris could be traced, anticipated, and countered. He did not speak again, instead reaching for his secure terminal on the desk, pulling up networks, records, and histories with rapid precision. Each data stream, each encrypted file, each anomaly was parsed, traced, cross-checked until he found it. The document, the execution order, the signature, the evidence that twisted his stomach in ways he had not prepared for. Iris's father, her protector, the man who had once stood as a symbol of her safety, had been executed under a signature that belonged to Cale, stolen, manipulated, and deployed by Maribel's discretion. The revelation struck him like a physical blow, knocking the air out of him with silent force. He understood now the true reach of her influence, the depth of her control, and the personal cost that had been hidden behind layers of deception. Rage, grief, and clarity surged together, a violent, unavoidable storm, as he realized that the woman who had raised him, the one who had claimed to nurture loyalty and power, had also orchestrated the very tragedies he had believed were external, random, unavoidable. The stakes had never been higher, the cost never more personal. The drive to the docks was quieter than Cale had expected, the city's nightscape slipping past in muted grays, punctuated by scattered lights blurred by mist and rain. His mind was a storm, yet methodical, cataloging everything he had learned from Maribel, every thread of control, every manipulation, every secret she had orchestrated. He had learned in the last hours that loyalty and survival had always been shaped by her hands, and the realization burned hotter than the engines beneath him. Still, he could not stop himself from returning to what mattered most. Iris, the woman who had been caught in the web of power and manipulation, and her reasons for disappearing, hiding, and surviving. The safe house had been half forgotten even before the fire, an old property near the docks that had faded from official records, erased almost as if it had never existed. Yet it had been more than walls. It had been a sanctuary, a space Iris had claimed in order to survive. Now, standing outside, Cale felt the lingering heat in the air, the acrid smell of smoke curling around him, staining his senses and drawing memories he hadn't realized were suppressed. The building was skeletal, charred, twisted, a monument to absence and secrecy, and yet it spoke volumes to the man who had built his life on observation, control, and instinct. Cale stepped carefully over the rubble, boots crunching against splintered wood and melted metal, hands brushing soot from surfaces as he advanced. The air was thick with ash, every inhalation tasting of fire and loss, yet the weight of truth pressing against his chest was heavier than the smoke. Each step he took was deliberate, cautious, measured, because the ruins held more than memories, they held proof, guidance, and the faint outline of danger that always seemed to trail Iris's path. He had learned to read spaces, to understand absence, to see what was not said and not left behind, and here, among the ruins, those instincts were alive and screaming. He found the lockbox eventually, half buried under beams and debris, its surface twisted by heat, lock melted beyond conventional opening. Cale did not hesitate, pulling specialized tools from his bag, instruments designed for precision, for secrets, for unraveling the invisible lines that separated safety from catastrophe. As the metal finally gave way, he expected letters, notes, something personal. Instead, the recordings came first, tiny devices that carried voices instead of ink, sound instead of paper, clarity instead of ambiguity. And the first voice he recognized instantly was Maribel's cold, precise, deliberate. The recordings unfolded like a meticulous confession, but not in the way Cale had anticipated. They were threats masquerading as protection, orders hidden behind the guise of his own will, instructions designed to manipulate both him and the world around him. Every syllable was calculated, every pause engineered to enforce obedience, loyalty, and fear. And yet, beneath the cold, systematic control, there was something else, the faintest trace of care, a logic that preserved life at the cost of freedom, a protection that was simultaneously cruel and necessary. Cale's hands trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from the convergence of revelation and anger, as he realized just how deep Maribel's influence had reached. As he listened, the truth became undeniable. Iris had not run from him out of betrayal, out of fear, or out of resentment. She had run to keep him alive, to shield him from threats he could not yet see, to navigate dangers orchestrated by a woman who had mastered control in ways Cale was only beginning to understand. The world he had believed he ruled was built not only on power and force, but on carefully constructed illusions, and he had walked through those illusions blind, ignorant, and unprepared. Love, Cale realized, had never failed them. Trust had been the fragile element broken first, manipulated into absence and silence by a hand stronger than either of them. He lingered in the ashes, standing too long, breathing in the heat, smoke, and remnants of fire. Memories flared unbidden. Nights when Iris had vanished, notes never sent, calls never returned, the faint echo of footsteps that might have been hers or might have been a phantom. Each recollection was now colored by the clarity of the recordings, each loss reframed as a deliberate maneuver, a step in a dance orchestrated by someone who had never underestimated him, yet had also never allowed him full sight. His mind raced, connecting the fragments of past threats with present danger, understanding that survival and loyalty had always been conditional, and that the conditions had been set long before Iris had disappeared. The safehouse's walls, though half burned, bore traces of evidence that spoke louder than any confession. Charred papers revealed the outlines of meetings, threats, instructions for the people who had been sent to watch, to guard, to manipulate, while heat-stained floors recorded the steps of the woman he loved and the danger she had survived. Cale's fingers brushed over blackened fragments, each touch a connection to the past, a tactile reminder that history had been written in ash and smoke, and that reading it required more than intelligence. It required empathy, understanding, and a willingness to confront the uncomfortable truths of loyalty, love, and power. The recordings continued, a catalog of precise interventions, protective strategies hidden behind threats, guidance delivered through fear. Cale's chest tightened as he realized the full magnitude of the orchestration. Every rumor, every obstacle Iris had faced, every life endangered or preserved, had been filtered through a mind that measured everything in terms of outcomes rather than morality. She had been guided, protected, and endangered simultaneously, all to maintain balance, to safeguard the pieces of his world she deemed most vital. And through it all, she had survived, a testament to both courage and circumstance, to instinct and planning, to the delicate intersection of love and strategy. As the weight of understanding pressed down, Cale's focus sharpened. The ash at his feet, the heat in his lungs, the lingering scent of burned wood and smoke, it all became a map, a pattern revealing the invisible threads of influence, the subtle manipulations that had dictated the past months. And in that clarity, he recognized the ongoing danger. The threats had never ceased. The people capable of following orders with lethal precision were still at large, still watching, still waiting for the moment to act. Every instinct told him that the world of shadows he had once commanded was still very much alive, and that Iris's survival had been only one small victory in an ongoing war. He reached for his secure phone, gloved fingers sliding over the screen, heart already racing. Notifications, encrypted alerts, surveillance feeds, each signal reinforced the knowledge he had been piecing together. And then it buzzed again, urgent, insistent, a vibration that seemed almost alive. The message was simple but explosive. Maribel's men had been spotted near the hospital. Not a threat, not a warning, but a presence, a reminder that the past and present had collided in a space where he could not afford hesitation. Cale's breath tightened, his eyes scanning the ruins around him, the outlines of the building, the smoke-stained horizon. He had been piecing together history in ash and sound, and now the future pressed in with the immediacy of danger. Every thought, every strategy, every memory crystallized in that instant. He understood the stakes. Iris was not only a mother, fragile and unprepared for the world's violence, but a symbol, a target, a reason for continued manipulation. And Cale, who had spent years relying on detachment and control, felt something he had not allowed himself to feel in months: the fierce, uncompromising need to act, to protect, to respond with precision and force. The remnants of fire, the charred fragments of history, the faint echoes of Maribel's voice in the recordings, all of it converged, creating a web of urgency, revelation, and inevitability. He paused, breathing in the heavy air, inhaling ash, smoke, and understanding in equal measure. Every instinct told him to move fast, to secure Iris, to anticipate the next move, to track the men who had been sent loyal, disciplined, and dangerous. And yet another part of him hesitated, caught in the gravity of knowing, of seeing, of realizing that trust had been broken, manipulated, and weaponized in ways he had only begun to understand. The safe house, standing in ruin around him, was a testament to survival, endurance, and the careful orchestration of consequences, and he recognized with a sharp, piercing clarity that nothing in his life would ever feel safe again. Cale stepped back, surveying the ruined walls, the half-burned floors, the twisted metal and charred wood that had been Iris's shelter, and understood that he was standing at a crossroad. The recordings in his hands were evidence, instruction, and revelation all at once. Every shadow, every lingering wisp of smoke seemed to whisper the same truth. Maribel's reach was long, her power precise, and the threats to the people he loved were real, imminent, and unavoidable. He clenched his jaw, heart racing, fingers brushing soot and memory simultaneously as a plan began to form, sharp and unyielding. And then the phone buzzed again, insistent, demanding attention. Not a call, not a message, it was a signal. A pulse of danger that threaded through encrypted networks. A warning that the men who had executed her designs were now close, watching, moving. Cale's mind snapped to action, trained reflexes kicking in even as his emotions swirled in a storm of anger, grief, and responsibility. The past was written in ashes, the present threatened in silence, and the future demanded movement. Every step from here forward would be deliberate, calculated, and lethal if necessary, because the woman he loved and the child he had only just begun to understand were no longer safe. The sterile hum of the hospital ward was broken only by the soft hiss of oxygen machines and the distant sound of monitors, marking life in delicate beats. Yet for Cale Moreno, the stillness carried weight far heavier than any alarm. He had not moved from the floor beside Iris's bed, sitting cross-legged, back pressed against the wall, hands resting lightly on his knees, every muscle taut with awareness and restraint. He did not reach for her, did not attempt to bridge the space between them physically, because the past had taught him that presence could be as devastating as absence. Forgiveness, he realized, was not his to request. It was his to earn silently, patiently, in the shadow of the choices he had made and the lives he had endangered. Iris stirred beneath the covers, eyelids flickering open to reveal eyes that had not lost their fire, despite pale skin and the exhaustion of birth and survival. She did not speak immediately, only observed him with a quiet intensity, a gaze that measured the depth of his remorse and the authenticity of his presence. The baby, swaddled and nestled against her chest, stirred in tandem with her awakening, small hands curling instinctively, reaching towards safety, warmth, and familiarity. Cale felt the invisible tether tighten in his chest. It was more than responsibility. It was love refracted through fear, protection, and the realization that nothing in his life had ever mattered as much as these two fragile lives. She finally spoke, voice low, steady, yet threaded with vulnerability. "Your men hunted me," she said, as if stating fact rather than accusation, each syllable deliberate, controlled. "Every step I took, every breath I drew, they followed, watched, and waited. And I survived, because I had to." Cale's jaw tightened, throat dry, because her words were both an indictment and a revelation. He had assumed betrayal, absence, distance, But now he understood the magnitude of the danger she had navigated alone, the calculated risk she had taken to preserve not only her life, but the child's future. Her gaze shifted slightly toward their daughter, eyes tracing the rise and fall of her tiny chest, fingers curling instinctively around the thin fabric of the hospital gown. "Love became something I hid to survive," Iris continued, voice barely above a whisper. "I learned quickly that it was dangerous to show it, dangerous to acknowledge it, dangerous to depend on it. But I never stopped feeling it for you, for her, for what we could have been." Cale's chest constricted because every word she spoke was both a wound and a balm, reminding him of loss, responsibility, and the fragile beauty of what had endured despite all odds. He listened, utterly silent, because for the first time in months he understood the gravity of listening, not responding, not asserting, not controlling, but simply bearing witness to truth, to confession, to the emotional history of someone he loved more than life itself. He had never been allowed this clarity, never permitted the patience to absorb her experiences without interference, and now, confronted with it, he realized the full measure of his own failure and the quiet strength she had carried in his absence. The baby stirred again, delicate fingers brushing against her mother's collarbone, searching instinctively for warmth and security. Cale's gaze fell on the child, and he felt a surge of emotion so raw and immediate it left him breathless. This tiny life, innocent yet entirely dependent, was the living embodiment of choices he could no longer control, consequences he had inherited by failing to protect, and hope he could not afford to squander. For the first time, the abstract concept of family became tactile, urgent, demanding action and presence beyond calculation. Iris's hand shifted slightly, fingers brushing against the blanket, adjusting the baby with practiced gentleness. She did not look at Cale directly, yet the subtlest flicker of her eyes toward him conveyed recognition, trust, and cautious approval of his presence. He did not speak. Words would have been clumsy, inadequate, almost insulting to the truth that hung between them like smoke in the air. Instead, he remained, an anchor beside the bed, listening to her story unfold, allowing silence to carry the weight of remorse, regret, and unspoken promises. The room itself seemed to contract around them, lights casting harsh shadows over polished surfaces, machines humming a rhythm that had once been comforting but now felt like a heartbeat they could not control. Every sound outside the ward, the distant murmur of staff, the faint shuffle of footsteps, the occasional thump of equipment, was magnified in Cale's awareness, every detail a potential threat, every anomaly a signal of danger. He realized that peace was fleeting, provisional, and that their fragile moment of connection existed on the knife's edge of circumstance. Iris's voice grew quieter, confessional, each word weighted with experience and necessity. "I survived," she said again, as if repeating a mantra, "but I did it alone. Every day, every night, I had to make choices that would keep both of us alive. That was my love for you, for her." Survival became the only measure of feeling. Cale's hands tightened into fists at his sides, knuckles pale, because the words confirmed both his guilt and his helplessness. He had assumed betrayal, when in truth it had been courage, foresight, and devotion that had guided her steps in the shadows of a world he had built and controlled but never fully protected. The baby's tiny yawn broke the tension, a reminder of vulnerability, fragility, and innocence juxtaposed against the stark realities of their lives. Cale's eyes softened momentarily, tracing the outline of the infant's face, the curve of her tiny fingers, the subtle rhythm of breath and heartbeat that marked life in its purest, most vulnerable form. He recognized that this small creature embodied both hope and danger, a living testament to choices made under duress, to love hidden behind necessity, and to survival achieved despite overwhelming odds. Iris shifted, adjusting herself against the pillows, still pale but steady, and Cale felt the warmth of her presence like a tether, a signal that connection was possible even amidst danger. Their eyes met briefly, hers steady and assessing, his guarded yet desperate, and in that gaze, volumes were exchanged, apologies unspoken, love reaffirmed, trust cautiously offered, and recognition of the shared ordeal that had forged a bond stronger than absence, betrayal, or fear. A faint creak outside the door drew Cale's attention, a subtle, almost imperceptible sound, yet enough to make his instincts sharpen instantly. He glanced toward the hallway, muscles tensing, breath steady, ready to respond to any movement that threatened their fragile moment of safety. The ward, calm moments ago, now seemed infused with possibility, each shadow a potential threat, each sound a signal that danger could approach at any moment. He could feel it in the air, the subtle charge that comes before action, before chaos. Iris noticed the shift in his posture, the sharpness in his gaze, and understood, without words, that the past had returned to their present. She did not panic. She had learned discipline, observation, survival, and yet, even in her calm, Cale felt the thread of fear, fragile but persistent, that connected them both to the world beyond the hospital walls, to the forces that had hunted, manipulated, and endangered them relentlessly. He moved slightly closer, careful to remain non-intrusive, a silent sentinel rather than an encroaching presence, every sense tuned to the environment, every thought anchored in protection and anticipation. Cale understood fully that love, while present, was vulnerable, and that the moment they shared was provisional, contingent on vigilance and response. Romance existed here, yes, fragile but undeniable, born from shared pain, from resilience, from the unspoken understanding that connection could survive even amidst chaos. A distant sound shattered the tenuous calm. A gunshot, faint but unmistakable, echoing through the building, reverberating down empty corridors, impossible to ignore. Cale's muscles coiled, instincts honed by years of survival taking over instantly. He positioned himself slightly between Iris and the hallway, eyes scanning, every nerve alive with awareness, every decision a fraction of a second from consequence. The world they had momentarily inhabited, a space of fragile intimacy, collapsed instantly into the realm of danger and necessity. The baby stirred, tiny fists curling instinctively, and Cale's hand hovered over the swaddled infant, ready, calculating, protective, aware that any action he took could preserve or endanger life in equal measure. Iris's eyes met his again, steady, unflinching, acknowledging danger yet refusing panic, a silent partner in vigilance and endurance. Cale's mind raced, parsing options, escape routes, response strategies, contingencies for every variable, as the hum of machinery and the distant echoes of the city became a backdrop to the immediacy of survival. The lights flickered suddenly, harsh and disorienting, and for a moment, the ward seemed suspended in darkness and uncertainty. Machines beeped erratically, monitors sputtering, shadows lengthening unnaturally along the walls. The small room, once a haven, now felt fragile, impermanent, as though the tenuous thread of safety could snap at any second. Cale's gaze darted to the door, to the hallway, to every angle of potential vulnerability, calculating, anticipating, measuring, even as the infant stirred and Iris remained steadfast. And then the ward alarms went dead, silence replacing the mechanical reassurance that had marked life for moments before. The absence of sound was louder than any gunshot, a signal more terrifying because it was deliberate, precise, intentional. Cale's instincts screamed at him. This was not coincidence. This was intervention, signaling the presence of unseen enemies, of forces waiting for opportunity, for mistakes, for vulnerability to exploit. The intimacy, the fragile romance, the quiet understanding they had shared all were suspended, held hostage by the invisible threat pressing in from the shadows. The moment the alarms went silent, the world seemed to contract, compressing time and space into razor-sharp awareness. Cale's heart raced, but his movements were measured, precise, trained through decades of survival and violence. Every instinct screamed at him that danger was close, unseen yet unmistakable, and yet there was no hesitation. He shifted slightly, placing himself as a barrier between Iris and the hallway, his presence a shield more powerful than any wall. Every muscle in his body was taut, coiled, ready to respond, every thought focused on one immutable priority: protect her. Outside, the corridor stretched in muted shadows, pale fluorescent lights flickering sporadically, casting eerie shifting patterns across the walls. Cale's eyes scanned constantly, tracing subtle movements, the glint of metal, the faint reflection of eyes not meant to be seen. The world beyond the ward was chaos incarnate, yet quiet, silent, patient, disciplined, exactly the kind of precision Maribel had taught him to anticipate, respect, and counter. And now, he was seeing it unfold in real time, in the hospital he had thought was a sanctuary, in the fragile space he shared with Iris and their daughter. He shifted closer to the bed, careful not to touch her, careful not to startle the baby. His gaze flitted between Iris, the infant, and the hallway, tracking angles, calculating sightlines, anticipating entries. The distant echoes of footsteps became distinct, a soft shuffle here, a muted thump there, each sound a signal that someone had entered the ward with purpose, silent yet purposeful. Cale's mind catalogued possibilities, evaluating friend from foe, ally from threat, his senses heightened to a level that made time slow without breaking his concentration. Iris's hand tightened briefly on the baby, eyes narrowing ever so slightly as she felt the tension in the air, felt the pull of danger pressing into the room like water seeping under a door. She did not panic, did not cry out, because she had survived too long in the shadows to allow fear to dictate motion. Instead, she trusted him, instinctively, knowing that Cale's presence was a barrier as formidable as steel and twice as unyielding. He understood this trust without need for words. It was fragile, earned through shared pain and survival, and now tested under pressure that made every heartbeat louder than the last. A faint metallic scrape echoed from the hallway, followed by the low, deliberate sound of boots gliding over tile. Cale's muscles tensed, body coiled like a spring, mind running simulations of every potential encounter. He weighed options with split-second efficiency, hands hovering near his concealed weapon, the cold comfort of steel a reassurance against the volatility outside. This was no longer about empire, power, or control. The stakes were intimate, personal, primal. Love, life, and the fragile bonds he had once neglected now demanded his full attention. The baby stirred again, tiny fingers curling instinctively, and Cale felt a surge of protectiveness so intense it threatened to overwhelm rational thought. He inhaled slowly, steadying himself, letting instincts sharpen rather than blind. Every move had to be deliberate, measured, because hesitation would be fatal. And yet beneath the focus, beneath the calculations, there was a flicker of something else: rage, unspoken fury, a need to confront the orchestrator of all this chaos directly. Maribel had shaped him, manipulated him, controlled his world, and now she waited just beyond the threshold, her presence both known and unpredictable. From the service elevator outside the ward came a soft metallic click, faint but unmistakable. Cale's head snapped in that direction. There she was, Maribel, framed in the dim elevator light, gun loose in her hand, stance relaxed yet undeniably threatening. Her eyes were not angry. They were wounded, reflective, almost regretful, as though this encounter carried its own measure of sorrow beyond strategy and control. She called him "my son," and the title hung in the air, weighted with decades of manipulation, unspoken truths, and twisted affection. Cale's heartbeat quickened not from fear, but from recognition that love, loyalty, and betrayal could coexist in a single glance. He did not lower his weapon. His hands were steady, heart tight with adrenaline yet free in purpose, because for the first time he understood that control and power were secondary to what truly mattered: the people he loved. Maribel had built worlds, orchestrated chaos, and ruled through fear and strategy. But he was no longer chasing empire, he was defending love, fiercely and irrevocably. Every decision, every flick of muscle, every twitch of the trigger finger was dictated not by ambition, but by devotion. The ward trembled with the weight of anticipation. Shadows stretched unnaturally across walls, shadows that seemed to dance in sync with the rhythm of hearts beating faster than they should. Cale's senses were sharp. He felt every movement, heard every whisper of air, saw every subtle shift in light. His mind raced through contingency after contingency, where Maribel could move, where allies or enemies might be positioned, how quickly Iris could react if he was struck down. It was an intricate puzzle, every piece dangerous, every choice laden with consequence. A sudden movement, a shadow flitting past the edge of the doorframe, made Cale's body respond before thought. He shifted slightly, adjusting his stance, eyes locked on the dark corridor, weapon ready. The baby stirred again, sensing the tension, tiny fists curling instinctively. Iris's gaze met his, steady but alert, communicating wordlessly that she understood danger without needing instruction. Cale's mind cataloged every possible entry, every potential threat, scanning for angles, for hidden corners, for the faintest indication of intent from the woman who had once ruled his life. Maribel took a deliberate step forward, the gun still loose but her movements measured, almost ceremonial. Cale's instincts screamed in recognition. She had always orchestrated motion, presence, and timing with surgical precision. He understood her tactics as well as his own, anticipating not just the direction of her body, but the timing of her actions, the potential use of cover, the calculated risk inherent in every inch she moved closer. The distance between them shrank, tension increasing, the silence charged with unspoken history, with love twisted through manipulation and consequence. Every second stretched. Every heartbeat became louder, more resonant. Cale's breathing was shallow, controlled, but behind the discipline was an undercurrent of something raw, personal, a need for reckoning, confrontation, and protection. He did not intend to kill her, yet he knew she represented a threat, a force that had endangered everything he held dear. And in the charged space between them, he understood that survival would demand clarity, precision, and absolute focus. Maribel's eyes met his fully now, the faintest tremor of emotion betraying layers beneath her calm exterior. She had always known how to manipulate, to guide, to control the outcomes of others' choices. And yet here, in this moment, she seemed almost human, flawed, vulnerable, a reflection of everything that had shaped him and the very people he was trying to protect. The recognition of shared history, of love twisted through power, created a tension that was nearly unbearable, and Cale felt the collision of duty and emotion sharpen every nerve in his body. The faintest clicked the sound of a safety disengaging, the whisper of metal moving against metal sent adrenaline rushing through Cale's veins. His finger hovered instinctively near the trigger, eyes scanning, breath measured but urgent. Maribel had always taught him to anticipate, to calculate, to respect the threat, even when disguised as familiarity. Now he understood the full weight of that lesson, not as guidance but as the pressure of life itself, and he braced for what would come next. The baby stirred again, small movements accompanied by a fragile gurgle, and Cale's head snapped downward instinctively, checking, protecting. He adjusted his stance, positioning himself subtly between Iris and the corridor, ready for movement, anticipating violence, poised to react with lethal efficiency if necessary. Every minute detail mattered. The angle of the gun, the trajectory of potential bullets, the possibility of sudden movement, the faintest shift in balance. Chaos was coming, quiet and precise, exactly how Maribel had trained it, and Cale would meet it on his terms. And then, without warning, a single shot rang out. The sound echoed through the empty corridors, sharp, loud, unmissable. Time seemed to freeze for a heartbeat, every instinct screaming in recognition. No one saw whose finger had moved first. The world blurred in that instant, shadows stretching and contracting, silence collapsing into violence. The baby let out a tiny cry, and Cale's hands were already moving, body responding before thought, heart breaking free in a mixture of fear, adrenaline, and the raw, undeniable need to protect the people he loved above all else. The echoes of the gunshot still reverberated in Cale's mind as he lowered his weapon, body rigid yet alive with adrenaline. Outside the ward, silence fell like a heavy curtain, thick and suffocating, but it carried with it a truth Cale had learned long ago. The dead could no longer hurt him directly, yet their influence, their legacy, lingered with the potency of poison in every vein. Maribel's life, orchestrated and precise to the last heartbeat, had ended in reports that claimed resistance, that claimed justice. Officially, she was gone, and Cale, despite the gnawing weight in his chest, allowed the lie to stand. He walked slowly through the hospital corridors, every step deliberate, controlled, aware that he was transitioning from reaction to reflection. Each motion carried both calculation and mourning. He had been shaped by her hands, molded by her control, yet now he was free of the immediate threat she posed. And yet, freedom was never simple. Her shadow lingered, invisible but pressing, in every choice, every glance, every heartbeat. He could feel it like a pulse behind his ribs, a reminder that the world she had built was only half gone, and that the consequences of her manipulations were yet to fully surface. Cale's first stop was not the hospital exit, nor the penthouse, nor the safe house. It was the offshore vault, a place Maribel had created for contingencies, secrets, and ultimate control. The sea lapped softly against the concrete base as he entered, the sterile chill inside the vault a stark contrast to the humid tang of salt air outside. The doors slid open with mechanical precision, revealing a room lined with shelves of files, encrypted drives, and secure safes, all designed to withstand casual intrusion, all designed to keep the past contained, polished, and perfect. His fingers brushed over the surfaces, feeling the cold metal, the weight of hidden truths, the faint vibrations of secured electronics that pulsed like hearts in the dark. And then he found it. A single folder, unassuming, labeled in a hand he knew as intimately as his own reflection. Inside, a single letter waited, carefully crafted, precise, unyielding. Maribel's words hit him instantly, the cadence of her voice echoing in his mind, deliberate, cruel, calculated, and yet undeniably intimate. This was a confession written without remorse, a love declared through dominance, a revelation that demanded reckoning. The letter unfolded like a map of manipulation. Every word carved the truth of her life's work into Cale's consciousness. She admitted the actions that had shaped him, the interference that had defined his relationships, the eradication of anyone who could have made him human. His father, gone under a signature forged in Cale's name, but executed under her control. Friends, allies, and enemies alike, purged or destroyed to maintain a system that only she understood, only she could command. And Iris, the woman he had loved, the woman he had believed had abandoned him, had been ensnared in the careful balance of protection and obliteration orchestrated by Maribel herself. Cale's hands shook as he read each line, not from fear, but from the realization of the scale of control and betrayal. Maribel had engineered the very boundaries of his emotions, shaped his capacity for trust, dictated the rhythm of his attachments, and measured love not in affection but in obedience. The letter was not just a confession, it was a blueprint for domination, a justification for cruelty, a reflection of her version of care that had destroyed what he might have called happiness. And yet, beneath the coldness, there was a trace of understanding, a strange recognition of intent, as though even in her cruelty she had sought to preserve him in the only way she could comprehend. He read her admission of Iris's manipulation, the dangers she had orchestrated, the lies and shadows designed to guide her actions without ever exposing the full truth. Every risk Iris had taken, every step she had moved in secrecy, had been necessary under the invisible strings Maribel had drawn across their lives. The realization struck Cale like fire. Iris had never betrayed him. She had survived, hidden and protected in the spaces between control and chaos. His anger flared not at her, not at the world, but at the invisible hands that had dictated the course of lives he had once believed he controlled. A rush of emotions surged: grief for the father he had lost unknowingly, fury at the precision with which his world had been orchestrated, sorrow for the stolen years with Iris, and a quiet relief that the immediate danger was over. Kael understood that deleting the file was not an act of defiance but of liberation. To carry forward, Maribel's version of love was to perpetuate control, manipulation, and violence. He would not do it. He would not allow the weight of her twisted affection to dictate his choices or his future. The letter, heavy with revelation, became both a testament and a tombstone. He deleted it without hesitation, allowing the silence to settle, final, unyielding. The journey back to the hospital was taut with anticipation. Every shadow on the streets, every flicker of light, a potential reminder of the reach Maribel had commanded. Kael drove in measured focus, aware that, although she was gone, the consequences of her orchestration lingered in systems, in people, in habits shaped over decades. Every instinct screamed caution, yet his heart sought the simple truth: to find Iris, to reclaim connection, to anchor the fragment of love that had endured despite fire, ash, and deception. Upon entering the ward, Kael's eyes found Iris instantly. She was standing near the doorway, the baby held close to her chest, posture steady yet weighed with subtle fatigue. Her expression was resolute, tired, but peaceful, an equilibrium born from survival, clarity, and decision. For a moment, time froze. Kael's chest tightened, his pulse slowed despite the tension, because he realized the immense strength it had taken for her to emerge from the shadows, to protect the child, to reclaim agency over her life and theirs. Iris's eyes met his, and Kael felt a universe of emotion pass between them without a single word. Gratitude, caution, love, and defiance mingled in her gaze, reflecting the shared understanding of the danger they had faced and the battles that had yet to be fought not in violence but in life together. The room seemed to shrink around them, every sound muted except the quiet rhythm of the baby's breathing and the subtle hum of machinery. Kael's instincts shifted from warrior to observer, aware that his presence now was not to dominate but to support, to protect without suffocating, to love without imposing. She spoke finally, voice low but unwavering, carrying the weight of her decision. "I won't raise her inside your war," she said, the words deliberate, final, and layered with meaning. Cal understood instantly. It was not rejection but preservation, not distance but protection. The child's life, fragile and innocent, would exist outside the orbit of his empire, away from the shadows that had defined their world. His own empire, his own responsibilities, were now balanced against the future of a life that demanded sanctuary, freedom, and love untouched by the scars of power. The words hung in the air. A quiet challenge, a declaration of autonomy that Kael could neither dispute nor disregard. Every instinct that had once sought control over Iris now bowed to her decision, to her judgment, to the wisdom gained from surviving manipulation, fear, and deceit. He felt the weight of history, the gravity of choices made and unmade, and for the first time in years, understood that love required surrender, trust, and respect, elements Maribel had never permitted, and that he had learned too late. For a long moment, silence enveloped them, punctuated only by the soft stir of the infant, the quiet breath of the hospital, and the residual hum of a life that had survived chaos. Kael's mind raced through possibilities, fears, and strategies, yet beneath the tactical analysis lay a deeper, more profound current, the recognition that connection, love, and family could endure outside the constructs of power, ambition, and vengeance. The balance of past, present, and future crystallized in the space between them, fragile yet undeniable. Kael stepped closer, careful, respectful, every motion deliberate. His gaze met Iris's again, steady, calm, reverent. He did not reach for her, did not attempt to argue, did not impose authority. The past had taught him that presence mattered more than power, and that love existed not in control, but in shared respect, mutual protection, and acknowledgement of autonomy. He nodded slightly, silent affirmation that he understood, that he would honor her choice, that he would allow life to unfold outside the shadows he had once commanded. The baby stirred, small fingers brushing against the swaddle, and Cale felt a swell of emotion so intense it left him breathless. Protection, love, grief, hope, and responsibility collided in his chest, each demanding attention, each feeding the resolve to uphold what mattered above all else. The lives of the women who had endured, survived, and thrived despite the manipulation and chaos that had once defined their existence. Iris's expression softened, the faintest hint of a smile touching her lips, acknowledging Cale's silent promise, understanding, and presence. The tension of the past hours, the weight of Maribel's manipulations, and the strain of their shared history hung between them. Yet in that moment, it felt contained, manageable, survivable. And Cale knew that for the first time, choice existed not in a vacuum of fear, but in the quiet reclamation of life and love. Her words repeated in his mind, a quiet echo that would remain long after they left the hospital. "I won't raise her inside your war." It was not a threat. It was not defiance. It was preservation, clarity, and love expressed through protection and decision. Kyle understood, fully, that his empire, his battles, and his power would no longer dictate the rhythm of the life they had begun to rebuild. The past had shaped them, but it would not define the child, nor the fragile, growing bond between him and Iris. Cale stood in the muted light of the hospital corridor, the hum of machinery fading behind him, each breath a measured release of tension and anticipation. Iris had paused, the baby cradled gently against her chest, eyes scanning him with that familiar mixture of guarded hope and unspoken questions. He didn't move to reach her. He didn't speak hollow promises. There was nothing to offer but truth, stripped of power, stripped of authority, stripped of the remnants of an empire that had demanded obedience and devotion, but never granted freedom. "I won't stop you," Cale said finally, voice low, firm, carrying the weight of experience, regret, and understanding. "If leaving is what protects her, if it preserves what she deserves, I'll step aside. No lies, no promises you don't need, only truth. I will dismantle everything my empire, my control whether you choose to stay or go." The words fell heavy between them, deliberate, real, a declaration of freedom more profound than any act of aggression or protection he had ever executed. Iris's eyes searched him, slow, deliberate, tracing the planes of his face, the shadows that lingered, the familiar hardness softened by remorse and vulnerability. She found the man she had once loved beneath the ruins of his power, beneath the layers of violence, beneath the cage of control that Maribel had constructed and he had maintained. That man had survived, unbroken, and now he offered her something neither wealth nor influence could provide: truth, respect, and the ability to choose without fear. The baby, tiny and delicate, reached instinctively toward both of them, a fragile hand brushing against Cale's wrist, curling around his fingers, then retreating to her mother's chest. Cale's chest constricted in a way that left him breathless. This small life, innocent yet fearless, had survived the shadows and chaos he had once believed defined the world. In her tiny gesture, she reminded him of the simplicity and purity of love, of the necessity to allow life and emotion to exist outside of strategy, manipulation, and empire. Iris shifted, placing the infant securely against her heart, steadying her posture as though preparing for a final act of departure. Cale did not stop her. He did not attempt to manipulate her decision with words, with force, or with appeals to the past. He understood finally that love required release, that devotion demanded respect for choice, and that the only way to honor both Iris and their child was to relinquish the control he had clung to for so long. For a long moment, silence enveloped them, thick with emotion, reflective, punctuated only by the faint stir of the baby, the soft hum of life, and the distant echo of a world outside the hospital walls. Cale's mind traced the paths they had walked together, moments of betrayal that were misinterpreted, of danger that had been unavoidable, of love that had been hidden but never extinguished. The weight of history pressed upon him, yet it no longer dictated the rhythm of his choices. He had learned, finally, that the future existed not in vengeance, not in empire, but in the careful cultivation of trust and protection. He took a step closer, careful, deliberate, letting his presence speak instead of his words. His eyes met hers fully, steady, open, transparent. "You've survived because you had to," he said, voice soft but firm, almost reverent. "And I've survived because of you. I understand now. I see what I should have seen all along. I see the cost, and I see the life we've preserved together, and I won't touch it with anything but truth." Iris's lips parted slightly, a subtle acknowledgement, and Cale could see the flicker of relief in her eyes, the recognition that the man standing before her had changed not because of power or fear, but because of love, clarity, and the understanding that connection required surrender, patience, and respect. Their shared history, once fractured by manipulation and violence, now shimmered with the possibility of restoration, gentle yet unbreakable. The baby stirred again, her tiny fingers brushing across Iris's gown, a reminder that the future existed not in ambition, but in these fragile, precious moments. Cale knelt slightly, offering a subtle bow of acknowledgement, a gesture of commitment without intrusion. He would protect her, yes, but on her terms, within the boundaries she set, honoring the sanctuary she had carved for their child. No empire, no war, no power could take precedence over that sacred trust. Iris's gaze softened, and for the first time in months, Cale allowed himself to truly see her, to absorb the quiet strength, the resilience, the careful control she exercised over the life she had reclaimed. He understood fully that she would never be a pawn again, that her love, her choices, her protection of their daughter would not bend to his will or history, and he could not have been prouder, more humbled, more committed, even without words to seal the promise. The air between them shifted subtly, imperceptible to anyone outside, but profound to them both. Cale's shoulders relaxed slightly, though tension lingered, a reminder of the world outside, of the threats that could always resurface. Yet here, in this quiet corridor, amidst machines and muted lights, a fragile romance blossomed, not the reckless passion of youth, but the deep, enduring love forged through survival, shared adversity, and unwavering commitment to each other's safety. He rose slowly, careful, deliberate, leaving room for choice, space for agency, and respect for autonomy. Cale's presence no longer demanded control. It demanded observation, protection, and an unspoken pledge that whatever path Iris chose, he would honor it. The concept of empire, of dominance, of power, had no place here. Only life, only love, only preservation of what mattered beyond personal ambition or pride. Iris took a slow step toward the door, baby secured, eyes forward, body tense but resolved. Cale did not move to stop her. He watched, breathing controlled, aware of every heartbeat, every flicker of shadow, every subtle movement. This was the ultimate test, not of strength, not of dominance, but of love, patience, and respect. His presence was permission, his restraint, a demonstration of devotion, his acknowledgement a silent vow to honor her choice above all else. The doorframe loomed ahead, a barrier between past and future, between chaos and calm, between empire and life. Iris paused, small yet deliberate, sensing perhaps the magnitude of the moment, the finality of the choices that lay behind her. Cale's eyes followed hers, heart tight with anticipation, yet steady with understanding. This was the culmination, the resolution, the delicate balance of survival, protection, and the first true freedom he had ever offered not just to her, but to himself. The baby reached out, tiny fingers brushing Cale's hand instinctively, and in that brief contact, the world contracted, simplified, clarified. Life persisted, love persisted, choice persisted. Cale felt the quiet triumph of endurance, of respect, of connection that transcended manipulation, power, and fear. The corridor, the hospital, the machines, they all faded to background. Only the bond, delicate yet unbreakable, mattered in that suspended moment. And then, just as the weight of finality pressed upon them, Iris paused at the doorway, breath steady, gaze forward. Cale held his stance, silent, respectful, a sentinel to both her choice and her strength. Time stretched, hanging on the edge of decision, until, in a single, imperceptible motion, she turned back. Their eyes met once more, and in that glance, an entire universe of unspoken love, trust, forgiveness, and future possibility passed between them. The war was not over, not in the wider world, but it no longer governed the space of their hearts. Romance, patient and enduring, had survived amidst chaos. Lies had been stripped away. The past had been acknowledged, reckoned, and released. And for the first time in his life, Cale allowed love, not power, to dictate the path forward, to shape the future of his family, and to anchor him in a life that could finally be his own. Wow, what a journey that was. Cale and Iris fought through betrayal, danger, and the shadows of the past, and in the end, love survived where power failed. If you felt every heartbeat, every twist, and every tear, don't forget to show your support. Hit that like button, share this story with everyone who loves epic, emotional romance, and drop a comment telling us what part moved you the most. And if you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe to Heart-Woven Tales, because here we bring you stories that make your heart race, that make you feel every emotion, and that stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Thank you for staying till the very end. Remember, love can survive anything, but you have to choose it, just like Cale and Iris. Until next time, keep your hearts open, and we'll see you in the next story.